I'll call the order to the June regular meeting of the Finance Committee. We actually have two different agendas today. One is the items that are on our typical and regular Finance Committee, and then we will also have a session on the budget. And so we're going to do the kind of the regular stuff first and the budget second, and I anticipate us being finished by 6:30 when the public safety is going to meet. We'll begin with the regular agenda. There are 5 items on the general and a number on the consent. Are there any items folks would like pulled from consent?
C1.
C1. Bear with me. Let me get over there. C1, I had one also. Hang on just a minute. C2. Any others?
If not, I move approval of balance.
Second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed likewise. So the consent is taken care of with the exception of 2 items. We will do C1 first.
Resolution authorizing submission of emergency solutions grant application, acceptance of grant funds, and execution of sub-grantee agreements.
Who asked for this?
I did. Can you just explain exactly what?
Mr. Brooks, you're up.
Good afternoon, Mayor, Chairman, members of the committee.
Good afternoon.
This item is an authorization to submit an application to the state of North Carolina for funding for emergency shelter grant. The city serves as the lead agency for the collaborative Winston-Salem and Forsyth County. This process is one that we've done before, so it's not anything new. The agencies that are being funded are agencies that have been funded before. The grant amounts are basically the same amounts as they have received before. I think this particular round of funding requests gave us an opportunity to put into practice some of the things we had talked to you all earlier about in terms of extended advertising, which we did. We did have a pre-workshop where agencies were invited, and the process was explained to them. We tried to respond to any questions. Both the advertisement and the workshop was very favorable, and we would just ask for your approval of this application. If there are any questions, I will try to respond to them, and Tim Grant, who is our resident expert homeless staff person, is available, and he will be able to respond also.
Okay, Mr. Montgomery, do you have any questions?
Is not questions specifically on the process and agencies that are actually receiving dollars, which, again, as you said, this is something we've done consistently over time frame. And this will go on, and I'll ask this question later on when we get to the budget piece as well, but particularly the oversight piece in these agencies that receive dollars here and other places. What is the process of actually oversight to ensure that the agency actually complies with what is required of the grant dollars?
We have 2 staff persons that are required to monitor all subrecipient activities. They do that on a regular basis, and in fact, we just completed an HUD audit last week, and that's one of the processes they looked at. I think I'm at liberty to say they were very pleased with the process that we had in place, and you should be getting some type of response for them regarding their audit very shortly. But staff is assigned to monitor. They do on-site monitoring and periodic monitoring throughout the year.
Ms. Adams had a question.
Yes. The new process or the prototype process that you're testing now to see how this goes, you remember I asked that the allocation committee, because this is what it is, it's the group that decides, is really an allocation committee, that committee consists of people besides people that work for the city. Did we do that?
We reached out to individuals this time that were graduates of the Winston-Salem University because it was such short notice. When we do our larger grant proposals, which will be for the Community Development Block Grant, we do intend to follow through on your recommendation and reach out to some larger organizations for assistance.
And thank you, Mr. Brooks. And a suggestion, again, that we send it out just like we do notices. I think it might need to go on Channel 13 and the paper, because it's a huge responsibility, and it takes, I'd say it takes some of the task off of us, but it needs to be where the people that help decide the allocation, it's a diverse group. It needs to be some business people, some people that benefit from whatever is a customer from the services that are being decided upon. I would just like to see, when we get to that point, if you please, those names and whatever. Not that I can veto or anything, but I'd like to see the cross-section of the diversity to ensure that when we get to this point next year or this fall, when we start looking at the funding to different agencies, that we can see that we have done our homework and went out and got people to help us make that decision, because now they're looking at it very diligently versus, not saying that we don't, but when I was on the allocation for the Smart Start and the United Way, I took that job very seriously. So I appreciate what you and staff have done to help facilitate the process to make it better, and I know as we move forward, it's just only going to get even better.
Thank you. And as a result of the encouragement that we did get from you guys, we got with the marketing department and an additional notification process that we had not used in the past was direct mailing. And we were able to send out 997 direct mailings to organizations that in the past would not have received this.
Great.
So I want to give thanks to Ed McNeil for assisting us in doing that process.
Thank you. Any other questions? Oh, yes, Mr. Montgomery.
And just also on the actual allocations here, under the United Way piece that's there on the rapid rehousing, can you bring something back at another time, just, well, not sooner, maybe by the end of the week or before next week, that shows which agencies in the past have received the dollars from the rapid rehousing? Because if I suspect it's probably the same agencies that are here, so it's a sense of why don't we just go ahead and allocate the dollars for the rapid rehousing rather than funneling them through United Way? Is there a reason why we do it that way?
I'll have to get back with you on that.
Okay. And the last thing I have to do in terms of this process is, per direction of City Attorney, I do need to divulge the fact that I am an employee of Family Services who is a recipient of one of the portions of the grant status here as well.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments on C1? Dan, you were late coming in. We're on C1.
Yeah.
Do you have a question, comment?
Just a comment. I'm not sure about this, but it's possible that the United Way allocations are in fact going to the Homelessness Commission, which operates through them. Is that a possible?
It could be possible, but I would hate to say for certain without checking.
Yeah.
That's a follow-up question, just how that money is handled there. Hearing no other questions or comments, is there a motion on this one?
Move for approval.
Second.
I have a motion and a second on C1. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed likewise. That one passed. We'll now go to C2.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, ma'am.
when you got ready with the second of the motion, we should have stayed with all recommendations that was made for the record.
Oh, okay.
To follow
Sorry.
through it.
I think that was understood. Thank you.
We do, but
Yeah, okay. Okie dokie. We'll now go to C2. You read that, please?
Consideration of items related to funding for Northwest Child Development Centers. Resolution authorizing funding to Northwest Child Development Centers Incorporated in the amount of $108,300. B, ordinance amending the project budget ordinance for the fiscal year 2013-2014.
Mr. Brooks, are you back up?
Yes, sir.
I asked this to be pulled, and I know some other, so let me just get my questions on the table real quick. I would like some updated financial data, and I saw the information we received last time, which I think was in February, or something like that. I would like to see the most current balance sheet you can get, and monthly P&Ls for the month since then. and specifically what has been done to increase revenue. I know the attendance is up, but what's been done to increase revenue, and secondly, what has been done to reduce operating costs. Those 4 items.
Yes, sir.
Any other questions here? Okay. Ms. Adams would like the same information. Just send it to everybody.
I will.
Okie dokie. Any questions, comments? If not, is there a motion on this?
Move for approval.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed and abstaining, and the chair will abstain until I get that information. I would like, before we leave the consent, if y'all will please go to C7. This was just for information only. This had to do with the Ramco doing some analysis of their balance sheet, but also incorporated here was a recommendation, I thought, to place the chair and vice chair of finance on that committee. We cannot tell risk management what to do, since they are a separate entity, but I can only speak as a chair. I think it would be a good idea to have council representation on that board. So I'll just offer that as a personal comment. And I'm less concerned who it is, provided it's some folks represented there. Yes, sir.
And I agree. I think that it's good to have that representation, as well as I've had conversations with the city manager and mentioned before about Ramco and just the process of us understanding and at some other time coming back to finance a process or timeline of looking at financial basis of where we reach a point where we may look to reduce the amount that we contribute because we've reached an optimal point of self-insurance. I think that's something important for us to look at, which may affect the overall budget.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, ma'am.
maybe our city manager or somebody should tell the public what is Ramco.
Good point.
Thank you, Chairman Clark. Ramco is a nonprofit that was established by the city more than 20 years ago. It stands for Risk Acceptance Management Corporation. It is a self-insurance nonprofit that we established to cover all of our claims and liabilities.
Okay, thank you. We will now go to the general agenda. The first 2 items had been on 2 previous months and kept not making it the time cut, so I did ask, and I appreciate staff putting these at the top. So we will do G1 first.
Resolution authorizing the city manager to enter into agreements with Novant Health and the Mobile Doc for the provision of employee medical services in the amount of $217,700. This item was continued from the May meeting of the Finance Committee.
Okay, this has been on the agenda for several months. We've read it several times. Are there any questions, comments? Why don't you just give us two seconds of what this is?
Okay. Basically, the city...
That's it? No.
Is this a repeat of 2 times ago?
No.
Okay.
There's actually 2 different items here.
Right.
Incorporated in one.
Right. The city actually went through a competitive bid process for city medical services, and we considered proposals from 4 vendors. They had the option of bidding for all of them, all the medical services, or some of them. Based on the bids that we received, we're recommending that Novant Health be awarded the contract for pre-employment physicals, drug screenings, flu shot clinic, and other medical director and clinic services in an amount not to exceed $99,200, and that Mobile Doc be awarded NFPA fire department physicals and cotinine screening in an amount not to exceed $118,500.
Okay. Do you know what those 2 numbers were prior to this contract?
It's about 20,000 more.
Okay. Questions or comments? Dan?
Just a brief comment. I was one of those who I know suggested to the city manager that they take another look at using Mobile Doc for the firefighter services based on their experience and expertise in that area and history of working with our department, and I appreciate the accommodation.
Okay.
Move for approval.
Second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed likewise. That passes. We'll now go to G2.
Report on Minority and Women Business Enterprise Disparity Study. This item was also continued from the April and May meetings of the Finance Committee.
Mr. Brooks, you're back up again.
You move your chair over there. Just move your chair.
If you'll give us a brief comment on what we're talking about here, please?
Very brief. As you know, back in February, the MWBE report was presented to council, and it evidenced some contracting goals that the city had achieved with respect to minority and business-owned businesses, women-owned businesses. And during that time, there was some discussion about a disparity study. And since that time, we've had several conversations about a disparity study. And as you guys know, the study itself helps to determine whether or not the contracting market is fair and equitable to all parties involved. So what staff attempted to do is just provide you with a little information about a disparity study, and I'll be very brief in saying again that the study itself will identify the presence statistically of whether or not there are disparities that exist, and it describes the climate for the minority and women-owned businesses. It may identify barriers that may be confronting them that would prohibit them from being able to be all-inclusive in the process. And it would give the city an opportunity to look at evidence that's supported by a proven study without having to go back and forth and guess whether or not this is being done or not being done. The cost of the study, which we would recommend be done by a company that has experience and someone that's very familiar with the process, can range anywhere from $200,000 and up from the information that we've been able to obtain. So we tried to just give you enough information that would provide you with some discussion thoughts that you could share with us in the direction that you would care for us to move forward with this item.
Any questions or comments?
I have.
Ms. Burke?
Can you tell us, not now, but the number of women businesses in the city, and also the number of minority businesses? And when I say minority business, I don't mean, I mean men. How many men?
Men.
Minority men.
Yes.
And women.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Montgomery?
I know that we've had much conversation around a disparity study in itself and whether or not it's necessary or not. And I know looking at the plain surface of the numbers that we see here, it would suggest that we are doing okay when it comes to our minority and women-owned businesses. But to Councilmember Burke's point, in actually breaking down this number and looking at women-owned business and particularly minority businesses, particularly when you look at racial minorities, I think that it may paint a somewhat different picture of what we actually see in those numbers. And I think that's one of the reasons that this conversation has come up, in the sense of really looking at the numbers more so beyond the women-owned businesses, but also the racial minorities, and making sure that the city is adequately contracting and doing work with those as well. And so from my perspective, I understand that there's large costs associated with doing the disparity study, but it's something, in my opinion, that I think may give us a better picture of our real ability and then the ability of those in this community that exist to actually perform the services that we require. And so it's something that I'm still interested in seeing how we can possibly have some more dialogue around this.
Okay. Mr. McIntosh was next.
I'm curious as to how we gather the data for this. Where's the input come from?
For the study itself?
Yeah.
It would be our recommendation that we would hire a consultant.
Okay, but it's
to
not,
provide that information.
doesn't come
It would
through
not-
us
It
through
would
any
not be
mechanism.
from within, no, sir.
Okay. And my other question is, do other cities, other peer cities our size, do this kind of disparity studies?
From my information, I know that Charlotte has done one, Greensboro, and some other cities, but those two locally I know have done them.
Thank you.
Ms. Knight?
This talks about the possible downside of doing a disparity study. Can you elucidate, please?
The downside.
Just that if it's found that there is no disparity, then I don't understand exactly what the outcome of that would be, but that it could force a neutral division of who gets hired. I don't understand that.
Councilmember Light, if I may, I'll
Yeah,
try
look.
to answer that question. I think the concern is that if you do a disparity study and that study basically comes back and shows that the program you have is more than adequate, then if you come back and try to do a race-based conscious type of program, you're not going to be able to do it because the disparity study will not support it. And any efforts to try to do a race-based conscious program in light of a disparity study that does not support it could end up subjecting the city to a legal challenge. And if you're not successful in that legal challenge, then you have to pay the other side's attorney's fees. The contractor who does not get the award because of a program that we put in place that was not consistent with the disparity study.
Okay. Mr.
That was the exact
Al-
point I wanted to make, that there is I'm in favor of certainly looking at this, but we've got to go into it with our eyes open that there's a chance it could come back, and we'd have to actually lessen our program that's existing now.
Okay. Ms. Adams, I think you have one.
Thank you. I, too, as Councilman Montgomery has stated, am for this. It will allow the city to, again, to the citizens and the people that are impacted by this and the perception, and that we all get, the city manager knows and others, that there is an issue. I have been and I have gone to Greensboro to some minority business and what's come out of their study, and I've attended some workshops, and there's another one on the 26th over there. I think if, again, we look at Charlotte, Durham, Greensboro, and the others, I guess my question to Mr. Brooks and staff is, what did we find out from them that was their quote-unquote downside of, examples of it? And they may not have had any, because to me, I would think if they had, I would have heard about it by now. I think, again, it's just another one of those tools in the city's toolbox that we could use to, again, help our citizens understand that we are doing the best we can do. I personally don't see an issue with it. I mean, again, like we said, we do studies with everybody and everything. I think this particular study has its merits that we need to do it.
Ms. Burke?
Yes, I was going to say some years ago I introduced the MWBE, and when it went to Raleigh, it was Representative Burke who introduced it for this city. Now, we can sit here and say that we're fair, how we do business, but we have not done, in my estimation, some of the best in trying to encourage and motivate minorities to be a part. A lot of, to a degree, even in doing business with this city. My question would be, how well have we actually done in getting minorities involved? How I would say, pleasant have we made it to make them want to feel that they can become involved? And I said years ago that this city ought to be a shining example of humane progress and bring minorities to the table. And we have not done, even with our city, Mr. Chairman, when people have called about wanting to get involved with the minority businesses, it's become complicated. We've not even had some people to make it easier for them, even in communicating and understanding. So I'm not saying that I don't see a study as being not done. I don't think it can take from us. I heard what the attorney said, but I also want to know some examples of cities if they've been tested on what they've done as well.
If I could follow up on that, I think it would be helpful, and this is just for information today, but maybe as a next step to get copies of you said Durham and Charlotte and Greensboro have done them?
Yes.
Now, if they're this thick, I can't read that much, but if you could get maybe the executive summary or something of those three. And I do know we hired a minority business liaison probably a year and a half ago, something like that time frame.
Yes, we do.
So maybe he could review those studies and see if without paying $200,000, if we could learn something from those studies and just kind of see what they said is kind of a next step, as Ms. Burke said, so kind of informational type stuff. Dan was next, and
I think probably in the context of understanding what we're talking about here, it would be important for us to know precisely what disparity would be studied. Is it the difference between the percentage of minority-owned businesses in an area, that is in a particular business area existing in our community, and the percentage of the city contracts they receive, or is there another? Are there another two data points that are being measured in these studies?
The one you describe is the primary data point that's being measured.
And so what would be gathering would be for each of the types of contracts the city makes, what's the percentage of available minority-owned firms in the community versus what's the percentage of minority firms that actually get the contract?
They've been utilized.
Thank you.
Oh, yes, ma'am.
One additional point with respect to Councilmember Light's question. The North Carolina Department of Transportation did a disparity study some time ago, and they had a program subsequent to that study that tried to enhance the utilization of minority and women-owned businesses. And the court determined that the program they put in place with respect to minority-owned businesses, and that enhancement was consistent with the study, but as it related to women, it was not consistent. So they did not uphold that part of the program because the data didn't support the measures they put in place based upon this disparity.
Chairman.
Yes, ma'am.
The chairman brings up a good point. We do have someone that city manager hired because he too could evaluate where we were going, where we were not going. So I think the point in having him to review this would be very good. Mr. Farabee will be the one. I believe that's who is in charge of that, Mr. Brooks.
You're correct.
Okay, and then, Mr. Chairman, was permitted to rest. Wake Forest, I believe, had a minority person actually employed, and when the attorney brings up about transportation, they use that, and this individual showed how cities could really involve minorities with the transportation department. I know about that, so we may need to get that, consult with Wake Forest to see what they did. That data could help us.
Okay. So add that as well. Ms. Light.
It's always bothered me a little bit, and when we look at minority and women-owned businesses, that in many instances, it's the wife of a husband whose name is on the, is the owner of a business, supposedly. He actually runs the business, owns the business, but it's in his wife's name. So that skews the data, I think, quite a bit on the women-owned business. So in fact, I'm glad that the way we report it is breaking out the two pieces. So.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes,
the
ma'am.
mayor can also remember when he was working for the city how we dealt in that real deep. And we also found out right here in this city we had men who owned these companies but had their wives as the head of the companies. And also you can look at the national level from that level where they did studies and found that the men actually owned but had their wives' names. That's why I asked the question, how many are actually women today? It may be more today than it was for actually women-owned businesses because women have stepped forward. I keep saying women step forward.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is we're going to get the next step, get a little more information, get the 3 studies from the 3 cities that are in the state similar to us. Also, Wake Forest has done a study, something in the transportation area, and maybe have our own city employee review those, and maybe they can consolidate some of the information in there, and we'll take that as the next step. Is that okay with everybody? Okay. We will now go to G3.
Consideration of items regarding the proposed November 4th, 2014 general obligation bond referendum, scheduled for a public hearing on August the 4th, 2014. A, resolution of the City Council directing the publication of the notice of intention to apply to the Local Government Commission for approval of bonds. B, resolution of the City Council authorizing the Chief Financial Officer to apply to the Local Government Commission for approval of the city's proposed general obligation street and sidewalk bond financing, general obligation public safety facilities bond financing, general obligation parks and recreation bond financing, general obligation housing bond financing, and general obligation economic development bond financing, and to submit such application to the Local Government Commission. C, resolution of the City Council making certain statements of fact concerning proposed bond issue.
Thank you. Let me see if I can translate all that. I believe this motion is the first step, and it is to call a public hearing on the bonds. Is that correct?
Yes, there are.
Lisa, why don't you just comment a little more there?
Sure. Good afternoon, Councilmember Clark and Mayor and members of City Council. This starts the legal process to call a bond referendum for November the 4th, 2014. And in front of you have 3 resolutions to pass. The first resolution is to publish a notice in the Winston-Salem Journal and the Chronicle on June the 20th about directing application to the Local Government Commission to apply for the bonds. The second resolution authorizes me, the Chief Financial Officer, to apply to the Local Government Commission for approval of general obligation bonds. Third is a resolution that discloses several facts about the bonds. One, that the bonds are necessary, the proposed amount for each bond is adequate, facts about the city's debt management policies and that they're excellent and are carried out in compliance with laws. Fourth, that the city's budget and fiscal management procedures and policies have been carried out and established in compliance with the law. And finally, that issuing these bonds will require a property tax increase. It also establishes the purposes for each category of bond and the maximum amount of each of the bonds. I also have a schedule that I want to show or share with you.
Okay.
That will, it's fairly strict in what we need to do.
And this, for folks up here, you do have this in front of you as a separate handout. Go ahead.
Right. So the resolutions that will be are asked to be approved on Monday night, June the 16th, are the ones that I just went through, the directing application of the bonds. June 20th, we have to publish the public notice in the Winston-Salem Journal and the Chronicle. The first, I will be filing the application with the Local Government Commission. In July, we will be bringing actually the bond orders that will be introduced for your approval, and at that time, we will set a public hearing. July 28th, we have to publish a notice of the public hearing, and then on the 4th, we actually will have a council meeting and a public hearing to adopt, well, public hearing and the adoption of the bond orders, and we also at that time set the special bond referendum. On the 5th, we will deliver that special bond referendum to the Forsyth County Board of Elections of August, and then it is well published the next day in the Journal and also the Chronicle for advertisement. We have to also publish the notice, the first notice of the special referendum by September the 29th, the second by October the 6th, and then the referendum would be on November 4th, and then subsequent to that will be the other publications.
Okay, so we're actually voting on, or this item has 3 things. One, to publish the notice of what we're going to do, and to authorize our CFO to apply to the Local Government Commission, and thirdly, just a kind of a finding of fact type thing.
Right. That's it.
Any questions, comments on any of this, Mr. Mayor?
No, I understand. Of course, this starts the process. We really don't lock in the final layout of the bonds until the August 4th.
That's correct.
So we've got time to work it
Right.
between
Right.
now and then if we need to. This simply starts the process.
But as of the public hearing, you'll be committed to bond order category and maximum amounts.
Right, category.
Right.
But you can reduce, but
within
you
the
can't add
category.
to it.
But no, what you actually, at that public hearing, whatever you vote on at that
On the
public
4th,
hearing.
absolutely,
On the 4th, right.
on the 4th. But
right.
between now and then, you got room to work
Exactly,
it.
but between now and then you have
Yeah.
time, right.
Okay. Dan?
Yeah, just a clarification on that. So between now and August 4, we could still decide, say, for example, the public safety category has $31 million. We could decide August 4 to shift that to $32 million.
That's right.
Okay.
Okay, any other questions, comments? Do I have a motion on G3?
Move for approval.
Second.
I have a motion, a second on G3. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed likewise. We will now go to G4.
Information on relocation of Wilson Barber and Beauty Shop, formerly located at 1529 East 14th Street.
Mr. Brooks, are you back up? Why don't you walk us through this a little bit, because most of what happened here was prior to most of us being on council, so this is not something we would have history of.
Yes. This was a redevelopment project that involved the acquisition and relocation of businesses located in the area of 14th Street between Cleveland Avenue and Dunleith.
Okay.
If you recall, during that time, you had a number of businesses that were located in that area, particularly where we now have, I think it's a little walking park, walking trail. There were a number of businesses there, and that area was part of a redevelopment area. As such, the city acquired both residential and commercial businesses in order to redevelop. In that process, individuals are notified that they can receive assistance once the property is acquired to help them relocate and reestablish their business. So I'll focus just on the commercial part. And in that process, businesses are eligible to receive a moving expense payment and what's called a reestablishment payment. So, well, actually it's three: moving, reestablishment, and going out of business. So if you decide to go out of business, you look at some average tax returns and you pay a certain amount. Or you can get reestablishment, which would help you to move your business to another location. And in this particular instance, Wilson's Barber Shop was one that was acquired, and they had expressed an interest to want to stay in business and be reestablished. So they were eligible to receive a moving expense payment, which they received a portion of that, which was approximately $800+, and the reestablishment, which is capped at $10,000, unless there are modifications to the replacement site that are required by local ordinance or state code. In that particular instance, whatever those requirements are, by federal law, you're required to pay them. So, irrespective of cost, although the cap is $10,000, you could have some reestablishment payments that could exceed $20,000, $25,000, depending on what the work was. So in this particular instance, the staff person, as we do with all of these projects, there was a community meeting held to explain the project, and we held individual meetings with those persons who would be affected. They are given a pamphlet which you have that talks about the process, because it is a government it's a federal project, so we have to follow the Uniform Relocation and Acquisition Act by the federal government. So you issue your notice, you meet with them, you explain what the eligible benefits are, you determine what their eligibility date is, and the process started. In this particular instance, we were working with Mr. Bonham, and he received part of a moving expense payment. He had expressed a desire to move to, and his business was located on 14th Street, and he wanted to move to a building that was maybe 2 blocks away down the street. And we got estimates to do the renovation work and complete the move. During that process, the owner, I assume at that time, was doing whatever he needed to do in order to go through the process with inspections to make sure all the permits and so forth were in order. And staff assisted with getting estimates to repair the building.
This is the new building.
This was the new building, the replacement site, yes. Staff met with the contractor on at least 2 occasions at the property to meet Mr. Bonham there. It's my understanding that on neither of those occasions, Mr. Bonham kept the appointment. Staff later did send a letter, which you have a copy of in your package, to Mr. Bonham, indicating that the project needed to move forward, and we asked him to contact the office. To my knowledge, there was never any contact with the office. The project was eventually closed out. That was 20 years ago, 22 years ago. We were recently contacted by Mr. Bonham, who said he was now interested in moving forward with the project and wanted to inquire about the remaining funds that he would be eligible to receive. Part of the process, and is stated in the pamphlet and the information that's given, and also staff, it's part of our normal presentation process to indicate that you have 18 months to file a claim. Now, the claim itself is where you file a claim for the payment. And if that claim isn't filed within 18 months, there is an option for an extension. In this particular instance, there was no request for an extension. The 18-month period expired, and I probably went over the 18-month. There was no contact from Mr. Bonham, and the project was eventually closed out.
Did the business actually move?
No.
It never reopened?
No.
Okay. Any questions for Mr. Brooks at this time? I know Mr. Bonham is here. If anyone would like to speak, they may certainly speak.
I'd like to.
Okay. And if you give your name and address for the record, please.
Jimmy Lee Bonham, 1617 East 14th Street, Winston-Salem, North Carolina. Mr. Brooks has given you some facts, but I understand there's a difference between facts and truth. And part of the truth that goes along with his facts are 14th Street was in two urban renewal plans. They had a certain name for the plans, redevelopment plans. The south side of the plan was one plan. The north side of the street was another plan. When they came in to raise our property for us to relocate from the north side, well, what we found out that the south side was earmarked to be zoned for commercial development. At that time, it was residential, but it was earmarked to be zoned for commercial development. So what we decided to do was to purchase the property on the south side of the street, because in the city plan, it was earmarked to be zoned for commercial development. So what we did, we canvassed the community. We went before the planning board. It passed the planning board, our plan. That means that we had to do the due diligence for rezoning purposes and considerations. Even within those, working with those considerations, we had to purchase an unnamed alley from the city. It is an alley that runs behind the property that has no name, but the city owns it. So we had to buy that. We had to pay for the rezoning permits. We had to pay for the architect to come out and do the plans. And when we had felt comfortable and thought that we were going to get the property on the south side, we were voted down by the full board.
That's for the rezoning?
Yes.
Okay.
So we began to look for other sites for relocation that was affordable and that was nice, that would be conducive for us to conduct our business. And in the East Ward, there were none. I mean, there has not been much development. There's not been much business property available for the scale of our business in the community. So there has been some efforts to bring back affordable business space for a business of our magnitude. So yes, we want to revisit that. Why? Because not only have our business been relocated one time, but it's been relocated 2 times by the name of urban renewal. Off of 5th Street, right across in front of the Winston Mutual Building, and then again from 14th Street, 1529. So yes, some time elapsed, but we were working to bring the business back, and we are still working to do that. Our prayer is that you all reconsider our relocations assistance for that. And then finally, when you look at the letter of the law as it relates to the federal piece as far as filing for relocation assistance, you have 18 months to start the claim, but the claim doesn't close after 18 months. So you get an 18-month window to enact the claim, not for the claim to be closed. I appreciate your consideration for assisting us with relocating our business for funds that's due to us. And we pray that we can continue to do business in the city of Winston-Salem, particularly in the corridor of East Winston. Thank you.
Any questions for Mr. Bonham? Okay. Mr. Brooks, where'd you go to?
I'm here.
Oh, can you, if I may, Mr. Bonham, before you sit down, do you remember approximately what time the rezoning of the property you wanted on the south side went to the city council?
I can't give you the exact date, but it's on your record. It was recorded, filed, so it's in the care of the city secretary. So,
okay, have you now found a place that you like?
we have discovered two places, actually two sites, but we're trying to deal with the cost of the lease as well as the cost of the upfitting of the two sites.
And you have not been in the barber business during the center?
Yes, I've never left the barber business. I'm licensed. My brother's licensed, my mother's licensed. So yes, we've still been in the business. But the thing is, we had two businesses on 14th Street. And the Wilson Barber Shop is my mother and my brother's business. Well, actually, we had a partnership in it. So we want to relocate that business within our community. Yeah.
Okay, but you have been actively working this whole time?
Yes.
At a different location?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Brooks? Any questions for Mr. Brooks? I thought maybe you had a question for him.
Comment.
A comment, okay. You have the floor.
Well, and it's twofold, and looking to my left to city attorney in reference to that process in terms of the Uniform Relocation Act and the regulations that exist there. Because if based upon what Mr. Bonham states in terms of the process to begin that is true, does that would lead me to understand that if we chose, we would be within the letter of the law to do something if we chose to in this process?
I'll have to research that. I've never known the process to remain open this long. The way it reads to me is that you have 18 months basically to file it, and it's 18 months after the latter of the date you move or the date you receive the final acquisition payment. So I can do some research and let you know.
If I could address that, Councilman. This is my 30th year in community development, primarily in relocation, and I have never heard of an interpretation as such that Mr. Bonham described. When the regulations require or state 18 months to file a claim, filing the claim is actually making a request for payment. So you make your request for payment by filing a claim, and at that point, it's either paid or denied. Unless over the 30 years, the Uniform Act has changed, and to my knowledge, it has not. I'm not aware that there is an open period for, once you file a claim, for it to remain open.
And there was a claim filed?
No.
Okay. And my comment is that, from my understanding, talking with Mr. Bonham as well as others in community area, is that at the time in which this was processed, and again, this goes back to 1992. I was 4 years old at that time, for the record. That it was some extenuating circumstance, in my opinion, in terms of individuals who may have represented the area at that time that may not have agreed with what was proposed to be developed, although it had passed the planning board without opposition from community moving forward. And my understanding that Mr. Bonham's perspective and what they were looking for was the fact that if they couldn't get it past council at that time, that they didn't have a whole lot of hope that they would be able to develop the business as they saw it at that time. And I don't know if that has any bearing on any of that, but to me, if I was looking at relocating my business and council shot me down at that process, that would as well concern me in that other process of relocating. I don't know if it has any bearing at all on our process, but again, to me, that would raise a flag for me.
Yeah. Just to briefly...
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Mr. Brooks said he's been in business for a long time, and I respect that. But Mr. Brooks, as you heard him say, that they did pay us a portion of relocation assistance. And I don't believe that they would pay a portion of relocation assistance if a claim had not been filed.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Adams?
Yes. This brochure is issued by HUD, correct?
That's correct.
So this is a federal government?
It's a federal publication published by HUD that they provide to cities when they're doing federal relocation acquisition and relocation projects.
Okay. How much money are we talking about here? Just hypothetically, what types of funding are we talking about that Mr. Bonham is requesting? Do we have an amount? I mean, I'm seeing 10,000 is the high amount in this brochure, but what do we?
10,000 is the cap on the reestablishment, as I mentioned earlier, other eligible costs, and I believe it may have been estimated to be somewhere in the neighborhood of 25,000, but you would not know what the final cost is until actual work has started and you got into the process of the renovation. So it could have been more.
And maybe I missed it in my readings. The part that I did understand was that if a person, once they, you had 18 months, that you have to ask for an extension, much like the IRS, I guess.
That's correct.
Okay, so where would it have been written in here, Attorney Carmen or Mr. Brooks? Is there anywhere in the writing of the brochure that says that the claim could be open indefinitely?
I have not found anything to indicate that at all. In my experience, if a person needed additional time, they would submit a request for an extension to Mr. Brooks' office and indicate the basis for that extension. I've not seen anything to suggest that a claim can be open for 20 years, but again, I'll be happy to talk to HUD to see if they have experience of this nature and report back to me.
Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Burke.
Mr. Chairman, the other day, somebody was asking about 14th Street, the businesses that was there, and they was trying to find out who was that person the city or somebody had hired for the redevelopment up in that area. That's one thing. I want to know that man's name. And another comment was made, some of those businesses never did get to do business. At that time, we were not really integrated like integration, and they did not have the areas to put their business in. If they did, let's say Mr. Brooks, one of those people up there, and they got discouraged, I do know that. They just didn't try to get back. If the communication the city had hired, can you recall, Mr. Mayor Jones, who that was, that man who was in charge of relocating the people? Because the people were very disappointed with him. I think he's passed now. He wasn't from here, but they brought him in. And who would be bringing him in? Was it HUD to come to do the job?
I can't recall.
It's been a good while.
Yeah, it's been 20 years.
Yes, and that man who came in, he was a black male that was in charge of relocating the people.
In that particular area?
Up there at 14th Street, when they took all them businesses out, who was it? Well, I think for the record, Mr. Chairman, maybe they can go back and review the minutes, even the time when it was stated that a council person. Y'all shaking your head.
To my knowledge, Councilmember Burke, the only persons that were involved with the relocation of the residential and businesses were staff. At that time, you had Thurman Ford and Ray Jessup, who were the primary
I know
persons.
them, but it
But
was
we did not have any outside person that I'm aware of that was involved with the relocation.
maybe I would talk about not relocation, urban renewal, and relocating businesses and residents in the area. HUD played some kind of part in that. Somebody was doing something, the city was doing something, but somebody was up there. It was, and I think the attorney who was working with that man was Attorney Wagner. I'm not quite right now, but somebody just.
We can research.
We'll
We can do
research
some
it.
research and try to find
And I will
that
say
out.
this is, sometimes it's tough to redo that history back then. Mr. Bessie?
I've been trying to determine what source of funds we're talking about here. Is this just city general budget? Is it federal funding available through HUD on a reimbursement basis? Or where would this money be coming from?
It would be federal funds from HUD.
All right, so whatever we determined, we would have to, if we determined that there was, extended eligibility here, we'd have to apply to HUD to get the funding to provide it.
And Ms. Carmen's going to be researching that, a little bit of that for us.
All right, thank you.
I have a couple of things I'd like to research. One, I'd like to know when this issue of applying for the rezoning on the south side of 14th Street, whatever dates you can get me on that, maybe I guess the council vote date or the planning board or whatever dates you can get. And number two, if Mr. Bonham has been still in the business, I'd like to know where he's been working out of.
He can tell you that. He'd rather stay on 14th Street.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Okay, any other, excuse me, I missed some folks here.
I just did want to clarify, there was a buyout option, correct, versus a relocation option?
Yes, a business had the option of going out of business and receiving a going out of business payment.
Right, thank you.
Ms. Light, you have-
No, I was just.
It's just a comment to Councilman Burke's point, particularly, again, this predates me in terms of council time, but it's not something that I have not been made abreast of by individuals in the area and neighborhood who say to the same extent that the businesses that existed there before in terms of that opportunity to continue being in business, that there seemed to have been very difficult to be able to find what was necessary to move forward. I don't say that justifies us past whatever date that we're in, but it is a statement of the fact of looking at process of dealing with matters like this, that if you're going to redevelop or go into an area and work to some type of redevelopment, that businesses that have there, if they don't take such of a buyout opportunity of that nature and they do decide to relocate, that there needs to be a specific intent by all parties to make sure that that actually happens, particularly when we look at businesses of that sort that existed along 14th Street and others in that area that were historically African-American businesses. That is something that, particularly now, we don't see. And part of that, as we look at this question, for me, comes up in sense of you had an opportunity to relocate, but was all of the opportunities that were stated to be there actually there for the businesses that actually left and looked to move? And again, that may have no bearing on what opportunity here, but that is something that concerns me in that process.
Okay. So the questions are, our attorney's going to do a little research on the kind of HUD's perspective on this, and I've asked for a little more information about this rezoning issue. Okie dokie. So this was for information only, and we'll wait till we get that information. Mr. Bonham, this will probably be back at, Mr. Brooks said, probably at next month's committee meeting, but we'll let you know however soon they can get that information. Okay. The last item on general agenda is G5.
Review of proposed fiscal year 2014-2015 budget.
Okay. Ben, you're up. Let me just pause a second. We are kind of going to the next chapter here. We're going to be talking about the budget, so this is kind of finishing the regular agenda, and we will now move to the budget.
Good afternoon, Chairman Clark, Mayor Joines, members of the City Council. We've provided a separate agenda for this part of the afternoon meeting. So the first item on the agenda is to review responses to questions from the mayor and council members.
Do we have an agenda?
I don't think they have that.
Is it in here?
Oh, it's on this thing.
I've got a couple of items here. I've got a real thick thing here. No, I think we're going to get one real quick.
They're going to make
It wasn't a long agenda. It was basically discuss the budget.
My apologies. We'll bring copies there in a moment.
Okay. All right.
But the first item was
For the
review
agenda.
of questions.
Okay, so let's, the first item on the agenda, budget agenda, is review questions from the last meeting, so why don't we do that?
The package, the responses the new responses that we added to the package are shaded in gray on the table of contents. Mr. Chairman, I didn't know how you would want to proceed, if you want to go through them
Yeah, let's just
individually or-
go, I'll just walk through. The first one's on page 7 and 8, everybody. What Ben and his folks are doing, as we ask additional questions, he's putting them in this packet, but he's putting them in under whatever topic. So if we had questions from a previous meeting on the fire department, additional questions go under the fire department as opposed to at the end of it. So we'll work our way through. So we'll start on page 7.
Okay, the question there, the new question was really an update on the Citizens Organizational Efficiency Review Committee's recommendation about tiered fire inspection fees and why that was basically identified for further study. At the time, we were also looking at the inspection schedule, for the fire inspection schedule. I think at the time, the thought was, let's work through that, implement the new recommended schedule, and then go back and revisit the concept of a tiered inspection fee schedule. So that is something that the Budget Office can look at next fiscal year as part of their new review process.
So that is, excuse me, go ahead, Alan.
Robert, I'm sorry. When you finish with that, I think we ought to go back to that very first item on page 1.
I'm sorry.
That was the new thing. I just don't think we should ever miss an opportunity to show the fact that the
All
state's
right,
costing
I'll
us
come back, thank you. We'll come back to that one. So on page 7, what we're saying is we're going to look at a tiered fire inspection as we look also at the timing schedule of how often we do the inspections.
Well, the new inspection schedule has been done.
I'll remember talking, so you're just going to review the tiered
The concept.
as part of your schedule that we talked about earlier. You're going to look through a lot of different fees and schedules as we go.
Yes, sir.
All right. So we now go back to the first one, which is the percent of the budget revenue impacted by proposed state legislation, and that's on page 1.
Yes.
Very first item.
Wanted to update this particular response in light of the evolving state legislation that occurred. Thank you. The legislation that was passed would have an impact in fiscal year 14-15, as well as the large impact that would occur in 15-16. The initial impact in 14-15, basically, the legislation restricts the business privilege license tax to only those businesses that have a physical location within the city. And so we've estimated the impact of excluding those businesses that do not have a physical location, that would be a $400,000 impact this coming fiscal year. And then in 15-16, the legislation would repeal the tax altogether, and then that would be an additional $2.6 million loss of revenue in 15-16. So we just wanted to make that adjust that footnote.
So the 2.6 plus the 400 gets us to the 3 million that you've got listed in the table.
Yes, sir.
And I believe it is in the, y'all have a single sheet that shows proposed budget changes. The $400,000 hurt or hit, what do you want to call it, is on that sheet. We'll get to that sheet separately.
Yes, sir.
Robert?
Yeah, go ahead.
The percentages that were shown here, those are a percentage of the $500 million number, the overall budget?
Those are
509 number.
So general fund, general fund.
Okay. All right.
Which is considerably less than the 500.
Right, right.
So I just think we should, every opportunity,
Yes.
indicate that there's so much happening out there that's beyond our control, that's impacting our budget in a negative way.
Okay.
And, thank you, Chair, just one more comment. If you'll notice the change in the available use of the stormwater fees, we're already getting hammered by our citizens picking up brush and trash and stuff. And just so the citizens will know, as the mayor said, with this change to the stormwater fees, it could put in jeopardy us being able to pick up leaves in the fall. And we were kind of late this year because of the weather, but if this happens next year, we could be picking up leaves all year long just to get them up. So just so people will know, you might want to write somebody or email or something.
But, excuse me, Ms. Burke.
And I was going to say, though, when we talk about picking up leaves, we have some citizens, that's all they ask of us. They pay their taxes, they keep their places looking nice, and all they ask, pick up their leaves.
Before we leave number one, the proprietary software is law.
Yes.
And that is our best estimate right now of the impact.
Yes.
Number two, the business privilege license, the only specific impact for this year's, for the coming year is $400,000. When I say we, who was in Raleigh? You were there, I was there, and there. We did meet with a number of our state folks down there, and there is going to be a task force that's going to look at doing something in the business privilege license area. And they have made a commitment, as says the governor, that something will be done before the full impact of the that issue hits, which will be in July 1st of 2015. And then the stormwater, Ms. Carmen, where does that issue lie right now in Raleigh? Do you know?
I think it's still pending. I'm trying to research and see where it is, what committee it's still in, but I'll provide you an update.
Yes, go ahead, Dan.
On that point, is that freestanding legislation or is that a budget item?
I think it's freestanding from the last book, but I'll provide a copy.
Things have moved very quickly in Raleigh, and even though we were down there on Wednesday of last week, I think it was, things can change very quickly between then and now. Go ahead.
And just, this point has been made before in discussions, but I think it's something that folks who are tracking our discussions ought to be aware of. The stormwater fees apply to all the property owners, including the major nonprofit institutions that are by state law exempt from our local property taxation. So if the General Assembly arbitrarily takes out one of the things that we pay for through the stormwater fees, it is narrowing the base, which is contrary to what the current legislative leadership keeps saying they want to do, and forcing us to shift the cost of that service to a narrower base of property owners, principally for-profit businesses and homeowners. So, that's something that folks should take into consideration in thinking about what they may want to advise their representatives as a matter of concern.
Okay, thank you. We will now go, we covered page 7 and 8. We'll go, if you flip over to page 11 and 12, those were the next items that we addressed. And the first one is the Children's Home Program. Ben, if you'll comment on that one briefly.
Yes, sir. Just wanted to note exactly what the residential care program is that the Children's Home provides. It's an emergency residential placement program for children who are in crisis. Oftentimes referrals do come from the Winston-Salem Police Department. The facility itself is located on the Children's Home campus there in the Tice Cottage.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And then the next one, you don't have to cover it in detail, but it does list all the funded agencies of the Arts Council. That came up last time. Point there is when we fund the Arts Council, we're also funding those organizations as well, and there's a number of them there. Yes, ma'am.
The ones that did not give information concerning their budget information, that's on page 11, right up under there.
Yes, ma'am.
Well, will they be penalized, or what do we would expect?
In the case of the Josh Howard,
I didn't actually say in case any of them. I'm saying, what are we expecting from those? I'm not singling out anybody.
yes, ma'am. Well, the Piedmont Triad Film Commission, they submitted their requests in a different manner. But at this point, in a future application, I mean, they would not be penalized for not providing that. We would do more follow-up with them to ensure that they did provide that information.
Yeah, I'm going to ask a question. I don't want you to single out anyone. These people that you have here, these agencies, have not presented a budget, yes or no? The ones you say budget information was not provided by the following.
They did not provide all of the financial information requested.
Okay, but they provided some.
Yes, ma'am.
And then for next time you give, they will have more to use in order to give you what you want.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Good, Mr. Montgomery.
And my question follows the same line, and the only reason I pose that question is because we've held a higher standard to some individual agencies when they come and with a request that, in my opinion, that should be a universal standard and not subjected only when we feel like we want to subject it.
Absolutely.
Yes, I agree.
But, not to belabor the point, but these are the 6 people that did not provide all the information we requested.
1, 2,
5.
3, 5.
5. Everyone else did above that.
Well, like I said, they provided some budget information. The decision about whether we would propose funding for them, and for a couple of cases, there will be potentially another funding process to address, so they were not included as part of the proposed budget.
Okay. But Ms. Montgomery just alluded to the fact that we require different information of different people, but I would think we ask the same of everyone.
Yeah, we do. We have an application that we require all the agencies to prepare. And then
Some may fill out more detail than others, it sounds like.
they have, and honestly, I think it's a case of the capacity to be able to fill out the application, and something I know that we've talked about is in the new process, offering opportunities to provide, I guess, some training for more newer nonprofit organizations to kind of learn about our application process and assist them in compiling that kind of information to provide a more complete application.
Okay. So, yes.
And what I'm coming back to on these other agencies, specifically not saying we're not the funding itself, but if you don't answer in full or don't respond with the full information, is that not any indication on what you're going to do or how you move forward with the finances that you're given? So that's just my concern in that process, that if you don't provide all the financial information, then if we're going to audit that or if we're going to ask a question on that, we didn't have all the information in the beginning, so how do we verify that all of that lines up together?
Mr. Chairman, that's what I was saying. When you give me something and I don't fill it out, then I'm not saying you penalize them, but then they're not following through. And it ought to be consistent. What you expect from A, get the same from B.
Yes, ma'am. Okay, Ms. Adams had a comment here.
Yes, we have discussed this, and Mr. Rao and Mr. Garrity, about, again, the process. The process cannot be different. It has to be the same process. Consistency is important. And again, we also discussed about the training and development of agencies, because there are agencies that, as we've said, that don't apply. Because one, the application process scares them. It's pretty cumbersome. So we should always, just like whether it's minority businesses or whatever, we should be offering some type of training process, doing the allocation process before it starts, to help everyone understand this. Because a person with a staff of 2 and a staff of 100 plus, they got different people in their organization just like we do. So I think going forward, we're going to see that as part of the new process, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. I would comment on page 15. Would you please highlight why the recycling tonnage went down? Because that was a surprise to a number of, and I think you had a logical explanation, but if you'll just comment what was there.
Yes, I think it's basically residual tonnage that had accumulated over time, and then when they actually got disposed, that caused a kind of a spike in the amount of
It was in the
tonnage.
C&D area.
Yes,
yeah.
yes, in the construction demolition.
Construction area.
It was material that was recycled at Haynes, and then when it reached a certain amount, then it was actually disposed of.
Yeah.
And then that's caused the increase, I think, in the 12-13 data, and then what we saw as the projections was more, excluded that.
Would it be more helpful to break out C&D from the Haynes Mill landfill type stuff, household waste in the future?
It should. I think
One thing, I will pass this buck to Mr. Bessie, but I do think there's potential synergy between the C&D landfill and the folks that are recycling the C&D material, that we could encourage folks to do that more. And again, I think we got to get a lot more into this. I'm not suggesting anything specifically this time. I don't know what the different costs are involved in this, that, and the other, but I think there's potential there, just as we have utilized a new program to increase our recycling with household waste. Mr. Bessie?
Yeah, I was going to agree with your suggestion that we break out the data, because we need to know how we're doing on the direct city recycling program, the curbside pickup.
Yeah.
And I know when we first saw those figures, some of us were scared that there was something going wrong with our curbside recycling program. Glad to hear that's not the case, but without the broken out data, we don't know how it's doing on a quantitative basis from year to year.
Okay, thank you. The next area, if you could turn to page 19, there was some comments on ridership.
Yes.
If you want to comment here.
I think one question was what has been the ridership for the most recently created route, which would be Route 30, which serves the Green Oaks, Autumn Oaks communities, and I think the estimated ridership there was 65,000 for the current fiscal year, 13-14, and I think that we had provided some ridership data for Sunday service. Right now, estimated over 51,000 riders with the new 7 Sunday service routes.
And when was the Green Oaks added?
That was added in September 2008.
It's been that long. Whoa. Okay. Any questions in that area? That was just, by the way, I will compliment, it looked like to me we added the appropriate night and Sunday routes. They seem to be tracking well, so I think that whatever analysis we did seemed to have worked there. I mean, we have some routes that people ride more of, and we seem to identify the right ones, so.
Good to hear that from the council member.
Good to hear that from the council.
Well, you're going to hear some other things in a minute. We'll go on that. Paving was also on 19. I don't know if anyone had any questions there. That was just a question of, the bottom of page 19, the second and third columns is how are our numbers going to change after we do the capital project. And it looked like to me we were getting a pretty good bang for our buck there. The percent that were 50 or lower looked like it went down considerably. Very not considerably, 3 or 4%. Okay. The next area we looked at, if y'all go to page 21, we had a few questions on golf and other rec areas. Yes, sir?
There was also a question there on the Corporate and Plaza renovation piece. And help me in terms of each one of these things that we worked on, particularly from 2009 to 2010, the $293,000 worth of work that was done there. I thought that part of that work was also done to assisting with some of the issues with the fountain.
I would have to go and check all the specifics of how that funding was used. I think it was mainly used for the repairs to the sidewalk, the bank, the brickwork, but I can confirm exactly the full scope of the work.
Okay, and the reason I asked that is because of the fact of what we have allocated in reference to Corporate and Plaza and the work there. I think we have to do something, but trying to understand, I thought, from my mind, I remember that there was leaking that was taking place from that, and so we replaced whatever was supposed to keep that from taking place. And so, from my understanding, some of what we're looking to do now touches on some of the same things. And so I just need to understand.
Verify that. Yes, sir.
Right.
Okay. And again, on page 21, we're just some, you might want to comment, one of the big ones, and it is on our one-pager here, the study for the deferred park maintenance. And I'm not sure, yeah, I'm not sure who should address that.
Well, I think
you want to comment on it?
Yes, sir. Our proposed one of our proposed changes to the budget will be to look at the other options about how we can do this deferred parks maintenance assessment. Because we do have a number of departments that have expertise, not only the Parks and Recreation, but also engineering and stormwater and property and facilities management. So we'll look at that, perhaps spread that assessment out over a number of years. And so what we're proposing is to take that funding out of the general fund balance appropriation and direct it to another project.
Okay. But and the one sheet suggestion you give us, we're going to delete that as a capital project, that study, and try to handle that analysis differently.
Yes. Yes, sir.
Okay. Any questions on the parks? That was. I'll now go to page 25, 26. There was a few questions about the cemeteries. I did ask one of these questions, and I don't know that much about managing cemeteries, but it looked like to me if we're getting ready to run out of single and four plots very quickly, can you take two plot sections and turn them into singles or into four plots? Is that, because that we've got a number for those left. Can we?
I think that would be an option that we would present.
Ms. Burke?
Yes, I spoke with Mr. Turner about looking at some plots that people own, and maybe all of them are not around, and they may want to sell them. The problem with that, if you have them, they give you the same thing you paid for them. If you paid $2, that's what you're going to get. But if they sell them individually to people, then they will get more. And I think we need to take another look. And he said he was going to be looking at that to try to get some more plots out there. Okay, buyback. That's right. Thank you.
Okay. Greg, it might be helpful if we could get kind of a capacity utilization, and I can speak for my wife's family. They have a family plot in Birmingham, Alabama, and I know only 3 of 8 plots have been used, and the others will be used maybe sometime in the future. So maybe some type of utilization.
I asked him to do that too.
Okay.
I said a survey to just see how.
Now, I will say, I think it would be difficult if part of them were used. I'll go back to the family situation. I don't think the family would be interested in selling for some stranger to go in there, but
They
if
won't
you've got
know.
somebody that bought 2 or 3 plots and has never used any of them or something, that might be worthwhile. Oh, for those of you who care, I was an article in the Wall Street Journal about in Europe, you pretty much rent a plot for 25 to 30 years and then they sell them. So. I thought that was interesting. We'll leave that as it is. Okay. The next area was positions affected by the minimum hourly rate increase. If you'll turn to page 26, I believe you've listed them here, and the number in parentheses is the
number of positions. So we've revised the table from an earlier version to add where these particular position classifications, what departments use them, and then how many positions they actually have.
Okay, but are these positions all filled? Zero. Okay, so if you see zeros in here, for example, we have no park rangers now. That one has a 0. I just pulled that one out. Ms. Adams, I think you actually
I did, and I was glad that they were able to show me that because, again, I didn't know we had a tennis instructor. I remember back in the day when the city actually ran Haynes Park, the Joe White Tennis Center, But as you can see, there's a 0 beside that, as well as some of the other positions, skating instructors and things like that. I'm glad to see that.
Montgomery?
In reference to some of the areas dealing with the fairgrounds that are 0 currently, at some point those will be filled, correct? Though during the seasonal piece that we have with the fair itself.
That's correct.
Right.
Okay, so those questions are, next one on page 29 was CDL training. That's commercial driver's license training provided in-house. That's on page 29. And do we provide that?
We provide the field training, the department does, but we also subsidize the actual classroom training. It's about $189.
Okay, so we do assist people in getting that commercial license. Go
And
ahead.
is $189 per person in that class, or is that the cost of?
It's per person.
Okay.
Okay. Next one was, I'm on page 30, the breakdown of performance ratings. Ms. Adams, I think you asked this one as well?
Yes, I did, that one and the next one. And thank you, Ms. Carmen. I did read over these anonymous reviews. Just for the record, I think that we're going to have to look at how we change this. Right now, the reviews, I know, is the best system that we have probably, but this is not the way it should be. As I've stated over the years, this is too subjective. Our employees need to be trained, just like Johnson Controls train their 200,000 employees. How do you comment and do your review? It's nothing really complicated, but when you have supervisors or management saying, quote unquote, I think you did a great job, that's very subjective and vague, and it can't be quantified or measured. You need to have more than that on there. And when an employee says, I think I did a good job too, no, we got to get with the new day of how you do performance reviews. They have to be smart, specific, measurable, achievable, that sort of thing. And I think we can get there, and I'd like to talk with you about this going into this year. We may not be able to implement it this year. We may get a prototype, but by next year, we have got to get to where we have metrics that actually measure our employees' performance and how managers manage the performance of the employee. Because if I was an employee and this was written, all of this that I read, I wouldn't probably get a raise, or performance merit. So I know for a fact we got to change this, and the process is too long as well.
Mr. Chairman, I agree with
Go ahead.
her. I do. And this is not anything new. Different elected officials have asked that I appreciate you, that our city manager and other city managers, the former one, to do a better job of how we evaluate our employees, because we're not consistent. One department head has its way, even though you have the same plan, and they come up, one person gets the better and not doing as well as another person may be doing.
Okay, thank you.
It's a good point.
Do you have a comment?
Yeah, the numbers here show exactly what I said anecdotally in the last meeting, that looking at these numbers by percentage, it says that 99% of employees that are employed at the city of Winston-Salem are satisfactory or solid performers or better. And I would love for that to be a 100% true statement. But to say that out of just looking at the number here, how do we really, and it's not to say that that staff are not doing a great job, because I think we have some of the greatest staff who do great jobs for us each and every day. But even in that process, for those individuals who may rate under a solid performer, whether it's low performer or non-performer, and understanding the process we do here in terms of them being put on that performance plan and doing those things there, is there fear, again, which I said in the last meeting, of supervisors, of rating individuals lower? Do we provide the proper training necessary for the staff to make sure that they are proficient in the jobs that they do? Because I have a problem if you hold an individual accountable for a job, but you didn't train them to do the job. and that's a concern for me. But I think those are all the things that we should take into consideration, which, again, it would be interested to me, and I don't know if we have those numbers exist, if it's public in other government entities in terms of the percent of individuals who are rated like this in terms above that solid place, to see where we compare with our staff and our ratings, because, maybe we are doing that great. But if we're not to say that we want to let individual employees better, but how do we help them to become better employees? How do we help them to meet the need of the citizens? Because at the end of the day, I think what most employers look for is not necessarily the person who has all the answers, but a person who's willing to develop the skill to accommodate what's being required of them. And again, that's just an area we've hit that, but I think we have to do some work in attending to that.
Okay. Mr. McIntosh.
I'd be curious to see how the departments rank in terms of, is there a disparity with some departments having more highly rated, some departments having more lower rated? So if we can get that info. Thank you.
Ms. Burke, you're next.
Mr. Chairman, and I think what we need to show when a person is employed, what do we actually give them about this job description? And then after they work a length of time, how we evaluate them. Are we really consistent in these different departments? And it needs to be documented. A lot of times, some of the employees have been reprimanded, maybe thinking they're going to get fired, and then when you ask, let us see what you've been using to evaluate these employees, they've talked off the top of their heads. So that's...
Okay. Dan?
Yeah. Anecdotally, I have heard that there are departments in which there are never any top performers, and that's counterintuitive.
Yes,
That's what-
it is.
That's counterintuitive.
Yeah.
Yes, it is.
So we ought to have some.
We've asked for, is departmental data appropriate? Is that the right level?
Right.
Okay. Okay, so that's on additional follow-up. Anything else as far as, Ben has just gone over our last questions? The next thing we're going to do, if you'll get out your one-pager, we're going to go over what's on here. If everybody get out just this one page here.
Yeah.
Does everybody have that?
Yes.
You have the floor again.
Based on the feedback that we heard last week at the Tuesday workshop and discussions at the public hearing, the staff has proposed some changes to the budget for next year. First off, looking at the general fund and looking at the expenditure adjustments on the general fund, we mentioned earlier about basically looking at other options for providing the deferred parks maintenance assessment. So that, which was a transfer from general fund balance, that expenditure would be deleted. That's $150,000 there, several lines down. What that savings would do then would enable us to address the issue with the roof replacement at the Susan Y. Austin Child Development Head Start building, to apply that $150,000 towards covering half the cost to replace the roof. I think we're still waiting to hear, or I think Head Start is still waiting to hear from Regional Head Start about the other half of the funding. So that would be a $180,000 contribution to Family Services. The remaining $30,000 for that would come out of general fund contingency. We had $100,000 budgeted for next year, so we would reduce that by $30,000.
Okay.
In addition, we're proposing to add the purchase of 5 hoist trucks to the budget to basically provide us a more of a backup fleet in sanitation for that particular service, so that when we're out on the routes and we have breakdowns, that we can immediately slot in a truck and keep the route moving, as opposed to now where sometimes there are delays because of the truck's down. Now, $145,000 represents the lease payment, the annual finance payment for 5 trucks.
Okay.
And then we're also proposing to fund the SciWorks capital contribution instead of out of the occupancy tax fund, funded out of the general fund. So that would be an added expense of $50,000 there, and that would be offset partially by another adjustment to general fund contingency. So it'd be $30,000 for the family services roof, and then the remaining would be applied towards the SciWorks contribution. That's on the expenditure side.
If I could interrupt you real quick, I understand we do have a representative here from Family Services. Sir, would you like to come up and offer any comment since you're kind of on the agenda at the moment? If you please give your name and address for the record, please.
It's Bob Fikema, the CEO at Family Services. Our address is 1200 South Broad Street, 27101. And I just can, I guess, update on what I had mentioned when I was at the meeting last week, that we did, in fact, send in our response to the regional office in Atlanta of our proposal to get $180,000 from the regional office. So that went in on Friday, and we'll be following up on that very soon. I'm expecting that we'll hear back from them before the end of the month. They haven't given us a date, but it's in process, and I'm sure that they're going to be looking at our request. Certainly any action that is taken by City Council, I think would have a significant influence on their decision, as you can understand. I think the very fact that we're one of the top 10 requests being considered now also says something, because there are many requests that are made of the regional office that don't even get to this level of review. So that's what I know currently. We're at that point. The only thing that I can see that could make a difference in the request that we submitted was the timetable, because we had looked at being able to act on this in the spring so that we could have work done during the summer when school is out. But I think given the timetable for things right now, that probably wouldn't be able to occur, so we'll have to look at a different timetable if in fact this is to go forward in terms of getting the work done.
So you will not hear back from the folks, the regional office, until sometime in the summer?
Yeah, they haven't given us a time, but I'm expecting to really be able to hear back from them by the end of June. And I can follow up on that and certainly get you a more definite time. But I know it's in process, and I don't expect it to be drawn out. They're either going to make a decision or not.
Okay, and so now given that timetable, you would anticipate putting the new roof on next summer?
I think we really would have to wait until we have that couple months when the buildings are empty in order to really get the job done.
All righty.
Yeah.
Thank you. Questions? Ms. Light, do you have a question? Okay. Back to Josh.
Does our decision here in this group affect the outcome at the regional level?
One of the things that they ask for is what is the community support for the project. So obviously this would be a very strong indication of community support, practically a matching amount, and I think that would certainly be very influential in their decision.
How much did you request from them?
$180,000.
Okay, so it is a matching
Yes.
amount. Okay.
One of the things I think, and we received today, that I think was forwarded to other council members in reference to this, is that if we did approve this and this, that we could put a portion of this that is contingent upon the receipt of the other part being matched, and I think that that hits on the mark of maybe being able to make that statement to the regional office on behalf of Family Services to help particularly get that. But if it doesn't come in, then we're not necessarily committed to the other part of that.
Okay. Any questions?
I have a question.
Ms. Burke?
I just wonder how many children you have at the camp?
At that facility, there are about 240 children. It's practically half of the 500 that we serve annually through other sites as well. So about half of our total enrollment is at the Sarah Y. Austin Center.
Now, that one at Winston-Salem State, you still have that one over there?
We still have 5 classrooms at Winston-Salem State University.
Well, we know with the Scouting, if it needs to have a roof, it needs to be safe. You have that many children. If you had only one, we want them to be safe.
Right.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you.
If you'll go over briefly the revenue adjustments, and then we'll open up for questions for all of this.
Yes, sir. On the revenue adjustments to the general fund, in light of the adjustment or in light of the state legislation, we are reducing the estimate for the business privilege license tax by $400,000. but also based on information we received from the league and also from the Fiscal Research Division, where there is an expectation that expansion of the sales tax base will generate more revenue for the city, and the agreement with Amazon.com will generate more revenue. The estimates we received, that impact would be an additional $568,000 in revenue, so it would more than offset that loss in business privilege license tax. And then we're also proposing to eliminate the $2 open gym fee for basketball. So we'd actually have a net increase in our estimated revenues of $154,000, which would go towards basically paying for the 5 hoist trucks and then the rest of the proposed funding for SciWorks.
Okay. Thank you for going over all that. Now, do we have any questions about what's on this sheet? Mr. Montgomery.
My question comes here specifically in the under the SciWorks piece and the portion that comes out here that it be done from the general fund. Just the premise on why, out of looking at different areas, we could have possibly taken to use the general fund to cover this source.
Let me answer that. We did look at the potential of using economic development loan funds. As you know, our project balances are very limited in those funds right now. And looking at it and thinking about the potential for SciWorks to move downtown and create economic development, well, at least 20, sometimes 30% of what we get from economic development we hold back and don't use in incentives, and that goes to the general fund. So it seemed like that was a good place to take it from, since ultimately economic development does benefit the general fund.
Okay. Any other questions on this sheet?
Questions or comments?
Questions, comments, whatever. Whatever you want to say.
A couple. One, I just want to highlight the hoist trucks for the brush collection. As much as anything else in the budget changes, that is directly responsive to a identified community need that we've been underserving, and that we. I know I have been getting comments through the roof over, and I imagine everybody has been. So thumbs up for that one. I do want to re-express a concern and elaborate a little bit about the Old Salem contribution. What this would do, this would more than double our appropriation for a single community agency, Old Salem. And when we look at what we provide, the total budget for Old Salem is in excess of $1 million. I'm sorry, in excess of $8 million a year. Our total appropriation now is less than $50,000. Under the original proposed budget, would go up to slightly over $50,000. But that's a drop in their bucket. By comparison, the Harry Vicos organization, we provide a little more than 20% of their total funding, but we turned down a request from them for a $7,000 increase. I have yet to see a good rationale for doubling, and more than doubling, our appropriation to Old Salem. We all love Old Salem. I love Old Salem. But it is overwhelmingly supported from other sources. This looks to me like a step one on a proposed transition of supporting Old Salem from a drop in the bucket to a substantial portion of their budget. They asked for $200,000 this year and came in explaining that in their calculation they really deserve to get more like $500,000 a year from us. I think we ought to look more carefully at whether we want to start the road on such a transition, and if so, why, rather than do it on a bite-sized year by year, especially in the context when we are turning down smaller requests from other organizations where it would arguably have a substantially greater impact, and in a year when we are having to increase the tax rate because of cuts that are being imposed on us by the state government, and are looking at a larger possible tax increase next year that we're asking voters to approve in terms of capital investment. So I really question whether this is a good time to be doing that particular change.
Okay. Point, counterpoint.
Yes, right.
Light is reckoned.
In fact, Dan, I think, for one thing, you saw the $8 million figure that is the operating budget of Old Salem. They're still in the red. It's a huge operation, very heavily, people labor intensive with all of the guides and all of the horticulture and everything. So and the very fact that the economic impact of what they do is so huge for the city, I think is the argument that we really do need to help more. They've already had to close down 1 day a week. And just to, save money. And so they are operating in the red, no matter how big that $8 million looks.
Okay. Any other questions on this page? Or I'll open it up to any other, whatever everyone wants to say, and I'll just go to Mr. McIntosh.
I want to talk about Old Salem here a second. One thing I think we need to consider is that Old Salem is a brand that we have. And I know a lot of people that work over there, and I think things are very tight. And I think if we allow that significant brand in Winston-Salem to deteriorate, I think it affects us on our revenue side. So I would urge that we go ahead and bump them up that additional amount.
Okay. Anybody else have any other? Dan? Well, let me see. Mr. Montgomery had a question coming. Go ahead.
It's actually a comment. It's on the same subject as we look at Old Salem in this process. Actually, I agree with Councilmember Bessie. The only place that I disagree in that sense is the source of the dollars that would be added to Old Salem. Now, if we were saying that source for continuing support from Old Salem was going to come from general fund dollars, that to me would be much different. But the fact that it will come from the occupancy tax, which is generated from bringing individuals into the city, that to me kind of makes a different argument for the support there, rather than if we were going to do a general fund increase that increases the dollars there. But I agree in the fact that if we're looking at other agencies that exist there and the operation that there, if we would do the same thing, such as the NAVVETS and Harry that are there that have requested for those dollars, it would make a much greater impact in the operation that they have there. But these dollars are coming from an area where I think Old Salem directly impacts on some of the work that they do. And I think we could probably argue on either side of this, but I do think that the concern that Councilman Bessie raises is a valid concern that we should pay attention to.
Okay, Ms. Adams?
Yes, just as I asked earlier again, the way we do this, we're going to have to change the way we do this. And it's going to have to be fair how we do it. I mean, we got to look at the data. Most of the decisions we make on agencies, Councilmember Clark, is on emotion and passion, and I got that. But just going back to what we said about the agencies, how the financials have to line up, how we do this process has to line up, because it'll always get more of what we have now. The only, agreeing with Councilmember Montgomery again, the occupancy tax is basically comes from people like or groups Old Salem and the Theater Festival and Arts Council and things like that. So I don't have a problem with that one. I don't have a problem with what we're doing here, except, like I said, I want to know in the general fund for the SciWorks, where is it coming from? It's just a general miscellaneous line item that we will use that money. And again, are we talking about for 5 years we're going to be doing this? Or as we go?
I believe the request is for 5 years, but council would have to make a decision each year.
Each year?
Yes.
Ms. Burke, did you have something?
Yes, I would like to know, in Old Salem, how many heads are in beds in that area, as well as SciWorks, and then from the schools system, how many students visit SciWorks? And when we look at, they were talking about River Run, and then they talked about the Black Festival. When you look at the Black Festival, it generates a lot of heads and beds, and I want to know how many, because I don't think that figure. And then when you look at this, and some don't like to, they like to skip around it, but when you look at the number of employees in Old Salem, it should mirror the community more. You look at the employees at Old Sour, it should mirror the community more, and it does not. And we look at the Arts Council, and I don't want us to take away our brand. The arts, this is what we're about. Innovation technology, Wake Forest is stepping up there now, and so these things are good, and we do love Old Salem. And I agree with Councilwoman Bessie when I brought up last time about the Harry Group, these veterans, and we give such a small amount. And I guess because I ride up and down Northwest and Patterson Avenue, and I see our lost and forgotten people, and some of them are our veterans who made it possible for us to be safe. And I thought that amount should have been more.
Okay, I have a few comments, but any others before? There's one, excuse me, Dan, go ahead. I'm sorry, I think I did skip you.
That's rightly so, because others hadn't had a chance to comment yet. I just wanted to make clear that I'm not asserting that the case for an increased contribution to Old Salem cannot be made. I'm just suggesting that in the context of what's been publicly presented, the presentation has focused on this is what Old Salem contributes to the community on an ongoing basis, and we all agree it does. But if we're going to talk about really major increases in public subsidy at Old Salem, the case has to be made on the basis of why the change, why now, what circumstances like closures or program discontinuances or that kind of thing, justifies really bumping up the taxpayer contribution, not to be made up front.
Okay, thank you. I'll offer two comments, and I think I promised we'd be finished at 6:30. I think we'll be. I'll just offer my 2 cents on Old Salem, and that somewhat mirrors Jeff's comment. I do think it brands the city. If you did want to look at it by the numbers, its impact literally dwarfs everyone else. It is nationally recognized, nationally known. And Dan, to answer your question, I do think they should get more because they have been impacted. They've been running in the red for a number of years. You said they're having to close one day a week. And I do think it is the most, in my opinion, the most important economic development engine we have. And go ask folks go ask Bob Leake when someone comes to town after they show them the site they want, they say, well, show me your town. And that's one of the very, very first places they go. So I'll just put my 2 cents in. What I would like for the budget to consider, if everybody turn to page 34 in the handout, and I have, just for the record, brief the councilman and the bus advocate on the council on this. I think it is time we make a hard decision on the item on the far left. The West End trolley is so far out of line with everything else. We subsidize, every time somebody gets on that bus, it costs us $23. I think it's time to get rid of the West End trolley. I had asked earlier about the new routes because I think I'm correct on this, although I'll look to Greg. The new routes, I thought the West End trolley was being incorporated, the routes into some other routes. Is that correct? Do you remember?
Do not.
Okay. But I did ask about the new routes. They're not coming in until next year sometime. So I would like to propose that, to me, that's just too big a subsidy. And I think when you look at it, there's some others in there that are a little high, but it really says for a lot of the routes that we do, the subsidy's not too bad. And I realize that's needed to provide public transportation. And I have two kids that live in New York City, and even the subway loses money there, even though it's $3 a ride or whatever it is. I think mass transit is something that generally does get subsidized, but I think that number up there is just way, way too much, and suggest that we'll look at that. And now, I will say, for the record, that there is another private company that pays half of that. I think it's Wells Fargo pays part of it. But the point being, that is not a good use of resources, nor is it, I think, good for the environment, because it basically means it's an empty bus at 3 miles to the gallon drive up and down the street. So anyway, that was the only particular thing I would like to approach, and I think at the appropriate time we would need to approach Wells Fargo on that. And if they want to pay the whole $23, they can keep it. Dan?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to say that we did discuss the West End trolley idea, and I agree. I think that's a classic example of a circulator that does not work for the reasons that we understand in a broader context. They when they fail because people don't know when it's coming. They don't know where it's going. It's not optimized to serve the potential demand. It doesn't act to build demand because it's a rubber tire trolley, not something that new development is going to know is going to be there on an ongoing basis. My only suggestion would be, let's not try to knock that out through the general budget process. Let's look at taking that out through the operations analysis that's underway now. And the reason I make that suggestion, there's actually a substantive impact. If we take it out now, we reduce the funding that go to the bus system as a whole. And what the operations analysis is and the routes reconfiguration is underway to do is to shift that funding pot appropriately so that other routes that are getting higher demand and serving more people can be idealized to provide the maximum service citywide at the most efficient possible design within the dollars that we're appropriating that area. So if we take this route out in the general budget process as opposed to taking it out during the operations analysis that's underway now, then we have the unintended effect of reducing the total budget available for the bus system, which we shouldn't do.
Well, I'm going to make the motion to take it out, whether or not it gets seconded and passed.
I'm going to second it.
Well, anyway, we're not making motions tonight, but
Right.
I hear you, but I've been looking at that number. That number's been out of line for so many years.
Yep.
Anyway, we have 1 minute left. Mr. Montgomery just raised his hand. We'll see if we can get any additional comments or questions that people have in that last minute.
It's in reference to the proposed changes that staff has in this manner here. These changes that have been recommended will be integrated into what we look at the next phase.
Yes. Tomorrow's.
Tomorrow at 2 o'clock, I believe. Is that not correct?
Yes, sir.
2:30?
Yes, sir. 2 o'clock.
I hear 2. I hear 2:30.
2.
2 o'clock. We've agreed at 2 o'clock tomorrow in the same room. We will have one of the last meetings on the budget because we're going to be voting on it next Monday night, a week from today.
And in that, because of that, I'll go back to the point that Councilmember Bessie just made, that I would ask that Mr. Turner, whoever, make sure that we provide the information to understand the fact that if those dollars, if we take that out, the allocated amount out, what impact does that have on providing the streamlined service that we have moving forward? I think it'd be good to make sure council saw that, because if that means we won't be able to do that sufficiently, we need to understand that.
Okay.
We'll provide that information. If you eliminate the route, your net cost is roughly $50,000 because Wells Fargo is subsidizing the remaining $50,000.
Okay. Thank you. But if y'all get any additional information, would be helpful. Okay. Hearing nothing else, we'll adjourn. I just see the chairman of the public safety just came in, and we'll start at 6:35. How's that sound?